Welcome back. All right, so we're getting closer and closer to the playoffs. By my count, this is week 21 of the power rankings, and usually week 26 is the end of it. So we are almost to the end of the power rankings, and then from then until October, there isn't a puck board. The puck board goes into retirement until October. All right, so we'll start things off at 32, and number 32 is of course San Jose. Actually, it's not. It's Pittsburgh. Yeah, Pittsburgh drops one spot from last week. They are now 32nd on the board. It is not the first time Pittsburgh's been 32nd on the board. They did sell off at the deadline as expected. Not a massive fire sale. All the veterans are still there for the most part. Raquel, some people were surprised Raquel wasn't moved. I wasn't. I honestly would have been more surprised if he was. It was clear that he was happy there and they were happy having him there. But Pittsburgh, right now, last on the board. Number 31 on the board, moving up one spot from last week, San Jose. Yep. San Jose is not last on the board, which might surprise some people. But San Jose had a pretty good week. Even tonight against the Islanders, they played a good game. They just got Sorokin, which they're not the first team to get, that kind of game out of Ilya Sorokin. They certainly won't be the last. So San Jose moves up one spot from last week. Number 30 this week, same spot as last week, Chicago. I've been talking about Chicago and how they're fun to watch. And they are. Chicago's a fun team to watch right now. But are they winning a lot? No. They have reached 20 wins, which is nice. It'd be nice to see San Jose reach 20 wins as well. I'd like to see no teams short of 20 wins this season, but we'll see if San Jose gets there. The Chicago Blackhawks are kind of a fun team to watch right now, and it feels like Bedard's starting to get it together too. So, yeah, Chicago number 30 this week. Number 29, dropping two spots from last week, Buffalo. I've seen some comments on that Buffalo video, and really there's more of a despair that I feel when it comes to Buffalo rather than move the team, fold the team. No, but it just feels like I try to find the positives, and here we are. We are this close to the playoffs, and once again Buffalo is down towards the bottom of the board. So while we see Chicago's making improvements, San Jose's making improvements, Pittsburgh's going into a retool or a rebuild, Buffalo is just they're stuck here. So I feel bad for Buffalo fans because I'm a Canuck fan. I know the pain of year after year after year disappointment. Number 28, moving up one spot from last week, is Nashville. Nashville might be winning enough games down the stretch here to hurt their chances to draft really early in the draft. I do think this is a team that if they could win the draft lottery, they could make a quick turnaround next year. They absolutely could. So we'll see what happens with Nashville when it comes to the draft lottery. They did get the win tonight against Chicago. And, I mean, they did get some new players at the deadline. They did make some moves. We'll see how everything turns out for them. Number 27, dropping one spot from last week, is Philadelphia. There's a lot of comments about Philadelphia and how they dropped last week one spot. I don't think I'll see the same comments this week. The reality was Philadelphia was playing well, but they had Pittsburgh 3 times in that 5-game streak there where they went 4-0-1. So those weren't games where I was moving them up. And Philadelphia plays a style of hockey that requires 60 minutes of really hard work to get the win. And at this time of year, it becomes more and more difficult for a team to do that. We saw that with Philadelphia when they faded down the stretch last year. This year, it feels like it's happening again. So tomorrow, they're at home against New Jersey. We'll see if they pull out a win there. Number 26, moving up 2 spots from last week, Seattle. Seattle got a nice win today. And Seattle, obviously, the pressure is off. And now that the deadline has passed, the players that are still there, I do expect to see their play improve. That does happen where, deadline's done, the pressure's off. You don't have to worry about being traded. You play a little bit more relaxed out there. And obviously with Seattle and where they are in the standings, there's no pressure on them when it comes to wins and losses. So just go out there and play your game. And guys are fighting for jobs next year. It is that time of year. Guys are fighting for jobs next year. So when you see a game that features one of these teams on your television, don't necessarily turn it off because some of the guys on these teams are going to be playing really, really hard trying to make sure they have a job next year. Number 25, same spot as last week, Boston. Boston during the week did slide, but the win they got over Tampa today moved them right back up to 25th. So Boston's still in the bottom row. I don't see them as a threat for the playoffs. I know that they pulled themselves closer with that win over Tampa today, but I think the writing's on the wall. Boston's played more games than other teams they're chasing. The math just doesn't math very well for Boston. And so they're 25th this week. So there's your bottom row. We move into the next row. Number 24, the Ducks. The Anaheim Ducks, same spot as last week. They do not move. There's not a lot of teams that didn't move this week. Anaheim and Boston just happen to be right next to each other, and they're the rare teams that don't move. In fact, just looking at the rest of it, yeah, everybody else moved. Almost everybody else moved. Just Anaheim, Boston, and Chicago maintain the same spots they had last week. Anaheim, the good news for Anaheim is Leo Carlsson's really starting to look like the guy they drafted second overall and they envisioned, and you got to keep that in mind as they have some issues down the stretch. Of course, they got that big win over Edmonton. They just couldn't follow that up with victories after that. Number 23, dropping 5 spots from last week, the Islanders. Bit of a tough week for the Islanders, and they lose Brock Nelson as well. They did beat San Jose tonight. They have Anaheim tomorrow night. Those are winnable games. They did win the game in San Jose and all that, and they're ahead of Anaheim on the board. So they, by that standard, should beat Anaheim. That's always kind of the way I look at it, is the power rankings board. The teams that I have, especially when they're this close to one another, I go into that game thinking, okay, the Islanders should beat Anaheim if I have them ahead of Anaheim. We'll see how it all turns out. But the Islanders do drop this week overall. Number 22, dropping 2 spots from last week, Vancouver. Canucks did get the win over Minnesota. They basically goalied the Wild. Lankinen was fantastic in that game. I don't think Vancouver played particularly well, especially in the third period. I get very nervous about the Vancouver Canucks with leads. I get very, very nervous about the Canucks with leads now. They're not the only one. We'll talk about other teams I get nervous with leads as well. Hi, Detroit. See you guys. I see you, and I understand. But yeah, when Vancouver is a lead, I get a little bit nervous. Number 21, moving up 2 spots from last week, Montreal. The Habs lost tonight against Calgary. I did not move them down as a result of that loss against Calgary. Dustin Wolf was fantastic. So was Dobesh. It was a 1-goal game. I feel like Montreal's done pretty well on this road trip, and we'll see how the rest of this road trip goes for them. Montreal, I still don't think they end up in a playoff spot. I'd be happy if they did, because nobody expects it and they won't have any pressure. And it might be kind of fun to see a Montreal team in a playoff game and in a series and see what happens there, especially if it's Washington, Montreal. Remember 2010? I remember 2010. So if Washington finishes first in the East and if the wildcard team they play is Montreal, that'd be kind of fun. I'd really, and you know what? I think Montreal would be picked as an upset by people. They'd be like, you know what? 15 years ago it happened. It could happen again. Number 20, moving up 1 spot from last week, the Rangers. The Rangers lost their last 2 games this week in extra time. I think the Rangers will be fine. I still think the Rangers have a really good chance of making the playoffs, probably moving up the board over the next couple of weeks. They have a very good team. When you look at that roster from top to bottom, they have a good roster. There's no way that team should miss the playoffs. So the Rangers, they do move up this week despite losing a couple in extra time. They did get points. They are, last time I looked, they are above the playoff line, I do believe. And yeah, the New York Rangers, it is going to be no, they're not above the playoff line. They're right below Columbus. Ottawa beat them. Ottawa gets above the line. Yeah, it's gonna be a fun race to the finish in the East. I will be doing other videos on the race in the East before we're done the season, because I get a feeling the storyline's going to change from one day to the next. Number 19, moving up 3 spots from last week, the Ottawa Senators, who got that win today. Brady Tkachuk was emotional about Josh Norris being traded. I thought that was a nice, real moment from somebody, and I have no doubt that he honestly was upset to see Josh Norris traded. And I would imagine, too, seeing like one of your best friends being traded to Buffalo and knowing that team's not going to make the playoffs. So your friend is going from a playoff chase to a not a playoff chase, and you're not going to be playing with him. It has to be tough. But he was emotional after the game today because they got the win. So that's how you do it. You go out there, you don't sulk about who's not there. You play with the guys who are. Cousins looked good in his debut with Ottawa. We'll see how things progress for them. Number 18, up 1 spot from last week, St. Louis. The Blues have pulled themselves back into contention. I would not be overly surprised if St. Louis actually did pull off the miracle and ended up with that final playoff spot. Much like Montreal in the East, St. Louis would be a really interesting playoff opponent for a team in the first round. I do think that we're due for a major upset in this year's playoffs. And I mentioned this in the live stream, the bloodbath we saw in 2019 kind of feels like we're due for that, where, favorite teams are out and it's complete chaos. Haven't seen that in a while. And the Blues are the kind of team that could pull off an upset in the first round. You got Binnington in net. Binnington should have a lot of confidence. Four Nations should have helped him, and he's been pretty good. And then you've got Holloway's one of those ace in the hole type players that I think he gets underrated. Yeah, St. Louis could be fun come playoff time if they get there. Number 17, dropping 4 spots from last week, New Jersey. The news for New Jersey has just been bad. Jack Hughes, done for the season. Dougie Hamilton, week to week, which means minimum of 2 weeks. Although the way that it was expressed, which was that it was an extended period of time, that's not good news. That's bad news if you're New Jersey. And yeah, I don't know if New Jersey's... I think New Jersey is going to make the playoffs. I'd be very surprised if they didn't, although the Rangers are within striking distance of that third place. But I don't know if New Jersey could do anything in said playoffs with the players that are currently out, especially if Hamilton misses that extended period of time and if it affects his play in the playoffs. Maybe he comes back, but he's not 100%, that kind of thing. So New Jersey drops 4 spots this week. So we move into the top 16. All right. On the board, I think there's a couple of teams that are not outside of the playoffs in the overall standings. I know there's some people who don't like that I do that, but it happens. Number 16, moving up 1 spot, a team that is not in a playoff spot yet, but Utah's certainly trying. Utah's making that push. I haven't looked at the high and low. At the end of the season, I'll probably do a video on the high and low from the power rankings and all that fun stuff, and then figure out all the averages. But Utah's had a very up and down season, and this is a good time for them to be playing well, and they are. I think that Utah has every chance of ending up surprising some people and maybe ending up in that playoff spot, because any of those 4 teams could. And I'm talking about Calgary, Vancouver, Utah, and of course, the St. Louis Blues. Moving on to number 15, down 3 spots from last week, Detroit. Detroit is not above the playoff line. And I'm becoming very concerned that Detroit will not make the playoffs. In fact, I'm concerned this is going to be the last week they're in the top half of the board. It's so interesting, and watching all the games that I do, it's interesting to watch as a team's confidence is gone, or that team's confidence is suddenly there. And in Detroit's case, it just feels like that confidence is gone. So against Washington, they get off to a great start. Everything's going well, and then all of a sudden Washington starts playing well, and Detroit kind of looks panicked. They don't look like themselves. It is such an interesting... And I know if you're a Detroit fan, it's panicking. But for me, just watching those games, it's interesting to watch as these teams lose that confidence. Confidence is something you can't measure. Advanced analytics won't tell you either. But you know when you see it. That's where the eyeball test comes in, where you're like, I don't know, that team doesn't look all that great right now, or this team looks fantastic. And very often it can just be confidence, their passes and everything. And right now, Detroit... gripping their sticks a little bit harder. Number 14, moving up 2 spots from last week, Calgary. The Flames do look like a team that should lock down that final playoff spot. They have the goaltending. They have the depth up front. I think Farabee and Frost have been very good additions for this team. And I like their blue line too. I think Calgary has a squad that can get into the playoffs, and maybe they could pull off a bit of an upset. Not to mention, if you get Calgary and Winnipeg in the first round, I don't think anybody's going to be upset with that. I think everybody's going to be quite happy to see Calgary and Winnipeg in the first round. I think that would be a very fun series to watch. So now that I've said it and spoke it, there's people watching this going, you know what, he's probably right. Number 13 this week, moving up 2 spots from last week, Minnesota. Minnesota's eked out wins here and there. I also disagree with people who were very upset with Brazeau being the addition. Brazeau's a big forward. He is ideally a third liner. He can play a little bit further up the lineup if he needs to. And I think he will bring a very Minnesota-like quality to this team. Like he should fit in with the rest of the Wild players pretty easily. And the Wild had a decent week. Yeah, they lost against Vancouver, but as I said, they got goalied. They outplayed Vancouver so badly in that third period that, yeah, I didn't move them down. Wins and losses do not always dictate what happens in the power rankings. I say that many times over, and yet the comments are always filled with people, oh, this team won and they moved down. This team lost and they didn't move. And it's just, the wins and losses don't necessarily mean automatic movement. It used to, and that created chaos that I couldn't defend. Number 12, meaning that when the board was done, I'm like, I don't know why these teams are where they are. I don't agree with this. That was what used to happen when I just reacted and everybody moved up or down. Number 12 this week, dropping 1 spot, Columbus. Good at home. On the road's a bit of an issue. They need to start winning more often on the road, and starting with tomorrow in New York against the Rangers. They could do themselves a huge favor by winning in New York in regulation. That would go a long way towards building at least a little bit of a cushion for that playoff spot and filling them with a little bit of confidence, and then they can start looking up above them at the New Jersey Devils a little bit more than looking down below them. Notice that I talked about the Rangers being close to the Devils and missed out on the fact Columbus is right in between, because Columbus hasn't been playing like a team this week that is in contention for a playoff spot, and I think they are still capable of doing that. So here's hoping Marchenko has a big week, and of course Merzlikins as well, all them. Number 11, also dropping one spot from last week, the Kings. The Kings basically got passed, as did Columbus. The LA Kings playing well, and I think the LA Kings pretty solidly in a top 3 spot in the division. Very likely to be third, though. So the tricky part for LA is I do think they end up finishing third, and they're going to have to start the playoffs on the road. They're going to have to take their home game on the road and try to win some close, tight games in the playoffs if they're going to escape the first round. And of course, right now it looks like it's very likely to be Edmonton and LA again. So yeah, the Kings right now, number 11 on the board. Number 10, moving up 4 spots from last week, Carolina. Yep, we're in Canes. A lot of talk about the Rantanen situation. I'm going to say this. Obviously, they couldn't come to a contract agreement with Rantanen. Rantanen wanted to play in Dallas. Gave Dallas a deal, kind of sort of thing. Like, okay, fine, I'll go Dallas's way. And yes, if he'd stayed in Colorado, maybe he would have signed that extension in Colorado if he'd stayed there till the deadline. We'll never know. But I think the move of trading Rantanen, I think getting Stankoven, I don't think it's this huge downgrade that some people seem to be treating it as. In fact, I'll say it's not a huge downgrade for this year. Stankoven is a good two-way player, and he's a good physical little player. He's a lot of fun to watch. So, starting tomorrow with the home game against Winnipeg, Carolina fans, get ready for some fun watching Stanky out there. Stankoven. Probably got teased for that last name, didn't he? That's just too bad. But I think it makes it tougher. Number 9 this week, dropping 6 spots from last week. When a team in the top row struggles, they drop. And that's the case with Toronto. First off, they had the loss against San Jose. And then they lost in Vegas. And then tonight they lost in Colorado. And so, yeah, it drops Toronto out of the top row. Because they lost to 2 of the teams in the top row. And then they were unable to get that win against San Jose either. So it drops Toronto down. It's a dramatic drop. Because I feel like the teams in the top row just had a better week and are playing better right now than Toronto. So I know the hate comments are going to be there. They're always there. The same people that would say, well, he overrated. Now it's going to be he's underrated. He hates. Clearly he hates because, but it's there. All right. So we move into the top row now. Number 8 this week, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Edmonton. So what moves Edmonton up is the win over Dallas. I feel like the win over Dallas was a big statement. Yeah, they almost choked it away, but they didn't. They got the win. They got the 2 points. They did lose that game against Anaheim 6-2. That's troubling, but they did get the big win tonight when they needed it, and they pulled themselves a little bit closer to the Vegas Golden Knights in doing so. So Edmonton moves back into the top row. After last week, they dropped 5 spots. So it's just teams in the top row that have a hard week, they drop out of that top row. It's easier to drop out of the top row than it is to drop out of the second or third. Just like it's easier to move out of the bottom row than it is to move up from the other rows as well. Number 7 this week, also moving up 1 spot from last week, Colorado. The Avs had a good week, both on the ice and off the ice. I think they armed themselves pretty well for the playoffs. I love the additions of Coyle and Nelson. I think that is perfect. They've added 2 more veteran centers. I think they're going to be extremely difficult to beat in the playoffs. So if we get Colorado and Dallas in the first round, I will agree with, and I'm trying to think of which announcer was that I was watching yesterday that said it's going to be a great first round. Was it Kelly Rudy that said it's great first round? And I don't know if they're going to have anything left at the end of it. Whoever plays the winner in the second round might have an easy out there because they could just, go right after each other. But yeah, Colorado Dallas could be a ton of fun this year. Number 6, dropping 2 spots from last week, Tampa. The loss against Boston causes them to drop a couple of spots. Nothing to be overly concerned about if you're a Tampa Bay fan. It happens. They went out, they laid an egg today. I do expect them to get right back on that horse and continue their ascension in their next game. They don't play tomorrow, but they're definitely, I think, going to be due for a bit of a bounce back from that game against Boston. That's not going to sit well with them. Won't sit well with any of them. So look out next game. Number 5 on the board, moving up 2 spots from last week, is Vegas. The Vegas Golden Knights are starting to round into playoff form. And they were doing this without Shea Theodore. And they didn't make any big additions at the deadline. I think it's weird. LTIR, they didn't do it. They didn't put Stone on LTIR. I saw this, it's Stone's turn. He's got to go on LTIR. Didn't happen. Nope. The Vegas Golden Knights, no huge additions for them at the deadline. It's been a pretty good team. All they did was bring back Riley Smith, and I think that was a smart move on their part. Number 4, moving up 1 spot from last week, Washington. The game last night against Detroit could be a really nice point for Washington where they turn things back in their favor, because Washington has had some struggles over the last couple of weeks. They're at home against Seattle tomorrow. That's one to keep an eye on because it feels like it's a trap game. It shouldn't be, but Washington's pretty comfortably atop the division, so could they maybe lack a little bit of focus against Seattle? Maybe. The big question, of course, with Washington is, will Ovechkin break the record? Sure. He breaks it this year, sure. I still, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking it's probably going to be in October of next season, but sure. Why not? He breaks it this year, sure. Number 3, dropping 1 spot from last week, Dallas. Tonight's game against Edmonton was mildly concerning. First off, losing Rope Hintz, if they lose him for any period of time, that hurts. That hurts a lot. Secondly, Ottinger, rough start for Ottinger tonight. I know some of those goals were fantastic by Edmonton, but still, Ottinger can be very hot and cold. And tonight, it felt like when he finally started to play like we know Ottinger can, that they were already down by at least a few at that point. And it is difficult to come back against the Oilers when you're down 5-1 going into the third. But they tried. They gave it a good old college try. Number 2, moving up 4 spots from last week, is Florida. And also, I will point out, too, Dallas was number 1 on the power rankings board during the week. And, yeah, now they're 3rd. So Florida's number 2. The Florida Panthers, excellent week for Florida. I think that they made the exact right moves at the deadline. I think adding Marchand, that's just like an extra cheat code for them. And now they could throw Marchand and Kachuk and Bennett and Greer, and like there's a lot of guys, a lot of forwards on this team now that'll just irritate the you-know-what out of every team in the league. So, and they're good. It's not just irritants, they're good. So Florida may very well have positioned themselves as perfectly as they could to repeat. Obviously, things in the playoffs turn out a little bit different than we expect, or we'd all get the playoffs and the Stanley Cup champion right. But Florida's done everything they can to repeat. That being said, Winnipeg's still number 1. I keep being told that being number 1 in the power rankings is a jinx. This is 21 weeks of power rankings. Winnipeg's been number 1 for 10 of them. 10 weeks at number 1 for Winnipeg. It has not been a jinx to them. Videos that I've made on them playing well, not a jinx on them either. So, yeah, Winnipeg, I think, still number 1 in the National Hockey League, in my opinion, in terms of power rankings. But you guys can let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you haven't done so already. So, once again, we're going to have about 5 of these, and then the playoffs get started. And when the playoffs start, I do not do power rankings, because power rankings in the playoffs are silly. I tried them. They just don't work. They're silly, and I knew they were silly while I was trying them. And, yeah, I didn't do it again. Just the one season, I was like, nope, not doing it again. All right, there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.